Hey, what's up guys, JQ, welcome back to Tech Creation. So I spent the past month or so getting to know the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, which is more than enough time for me to become familiar with it. And my setup is Thunderbolt 3 dependent, so it requires a certain level of organization and productivity that the iPad Pro simply cannot provide. So while the iPad Pro won't be replacing my MacBook Pro, it's still a decent computer, but it's just not a laptop replacement. So without wasting any time, let's talk about it. So at first I was both shocked and impressed by how thin it was. It's also relatively light for its size, making it backpack friendly as it sits more comfortably and in more places than some laptops would, so that's a plus. Now it comes in silver and space gray, and for obvious reasons I chose space gray. It just looks so much better and more appropriate when it comes to tech. It feels great in the hand and it's every bit of premium that you would expect from an Apple device, and for that price tag it better be. So the combined cost of the iPad, the Apple Pencil, and the Smart Folio Keyboard was $1,628.06. You can get a mid-range base model 13-inch MacBook Pro for that same price. So that's something to keep in mind. So a quick look around, you'll find 4 powerful speakers. You have 2 on each side, and then you have a total of 5 microphones. You have 1 to the right of the FaceTime camera, 1 underneath the rear camera on the back, and when holding it in portrait, you have 1 on your left side, and then 2 more between the speakers up top. Now the speakers and microphones together make the experience of handling FaceTime calls on the iPad a breeze. It's super high quality, crispy clear on both ends, and the music playback on these rich speakers sound phenomenal. The amount of bass that this iPad puts out is impressive considering how super thin its form factor is. In a blind audio test, you'd probably think it was a Bluetooth speaker if you didn't know any better. So that makes the iPad perfect for casual background listening while you're in the middle of doing something else. I boasted about how much I love Face ID in previous videos, and I'm so glad that an improved version of Face ID makes its way onto the iPad, meaning that it works in both portrait and landscape this time, and this is hands down my favorite method of authentication, and I wish all of my devices had this. Besides your finger occasionally covering the camera and landscape, it works just as well as it does on the iPhone. It definitely beats typing in a passcode any day. Now on the back you'll find your smart connector on the lower center, along with your magnetic connector on the side, which together are used to attach accessories like Apple's 3rd generation Smart Folio Keyboard and the 2nd gen Apple Pencil. Now the accessories aren't exactly necessary, but it does give you the full iPad experience. Now speaking of magnets and attaching, there's a total of 102 magnets all around the back of the iPad, which together are strong enough to attach to your fridge. And for my longtime subscribers out there, you guys know I'm pretty deep into the smart home game, so the iPad Pro fits right at home. So alongside my Pixel C Android tablet that's already on my fridge, the iPad Pro makes a perfect addition to any smart home for using as a smart hub, for streaming music, weather, or just simply for infotainment. A bunch of different combinations you can play around with. Now moving on to the display, the first thing that stood out to me was just how vibrant and sharp this screen is. The resolution is just above 2K, 2.7K to be exact, so everything is obviously sharper than the human eye even needs. Apple calls this their Liquid Retina True Tone IPS display, which is just fancy words for the display looks great. It's gorgeous at that. The colors are really something else, and it's just one of those displays where you wake the screen just to look at the wallpaper for no reason. It looks really good. Now ironically, because the screen is so great, is also why it's so disappointing in some scenarios. When it comes to YouTube, Apple's lack of support for Google's VP9 video codec sets the upper limit for higher definition YouTube videos to 1080p only. And that pretty much defeats the purpose of having a great display, because that's like buying a 4K TV just to watch standard definition content. It doesn't really make any sense. Now 1440p used to be an option on iOS, but not anymore. And this is not an issue with smartphones because the screen is relatively small and is usually held at a distance. But when we're talking about a 12.9-inch display, that's an entirely different story, because 1080p content is noticeably blurry when stretched full screen, to where you might find it more pleasant watching YouTube in the normal window. Now I also had to download Vlc Media Player just to play back a QuickTime video, because iOS's native media player couldn't read the file, which I didn't quite understand that, given that QuickTime is Apple's very own format and that same file plays just fine on my MacBook Pro. So in my opinion, if the iPad Pro wants to be a part of the whole laptop conversation, then minor workarounds like this shouldn't even exist. But on the bright side, I will say Netflix actually does stream UHD titles in UHD, so that evens out my disappointment a little bit. Now, I'm surprised that 3D Touch is not on the iPad. I heard that it was technically technically not possible to do, but I'm pretty sure if they wanted to, they could have made it happen. Because I feel like if anything, for a productivity tablet of this size, 3D Touch would have been ideal, especially for using together with the Apple Pencil. I think it would have come in handy. So if 3D Touch is something that you used a lot on your iPhone, then just be prepared to adjust on the iPad. Now, Apple says that the display is fingerprint resistant, which is fake news. I mean, just from this little time handling the iPad, I'm not sure if you can see it, but this display is full of fingerprints and smudges, and I find myself having to wipe down the screen just as often as I would any other device that has a screen. So I'm not sure how they tested that, but that's something to keep in mind. Now, shifting back to the Apple Pencil, I think that Apple did a great job. Initially, I thought that the Pencil would be able to substitute my finger, but that's not the case, unfortunately. So input is limited, meaning that you can't perform iOS gestures with the Apple Pencil, like swiping back to a previous app. That's something else I didn't quite understand. I mean, because constantly switching between your finger and the pencil while navigating iOS does become annoying at times, but for a stylus, it works as expected. It's comfortable, it feels just like a normal pencil, but longer and thicker, and this flat edge makes it easier to grip, but it's also what's used to magnetically attach to the iPad for charging. And if there's any feature I like the most, it's gotta be this one. It snaps securely in place and it begins charging from the iPad right away. And as we saw with the Galaxy S10, clearly power sharing is the future. It's practical, convenient, and best of all, it's not an eyesore. And using apps like Adobe Sketch is where the potential of the Apple Pencil really shines. Strokes and lines when drawing look and feel realistic, and the precision and the pressure sensitivity is very true to life. I'm not an artist, but it does make being an artist pretty easy. It gives you a little creative confidence, and I had a little bit of fun tapping into my 6th grade drawing skills. By the way, I have a bunch of friends here in New York who are actual artists, so if you guys would be interested in seeing a separate artist collaborative review on the iPad Pro, let me know by dropping a comment down below and I'll be sure to make that happen. Theoretically, the iPad Pro can replace your laptop if you're dedicated enough. And I say this because although it's a little short for my taste, the Folio Keyboard does perform really well. In addition to using the Apple Pencil for selecting text and documents, the two combined made typing on the iPad a breeze. The keys are textured enough to strike every key with accuracy, my fingers flow across the keyboard nicely, and the response time is quick. There's no lag of any sort, and I enjoy typing so much that I found myself doing most of my research on here. I actually typed up half of this video script with the iPad using Google Docs, so that within itself says a lot. And I just love the fact that the keyboard is sealed, so spilling drinks isn't a concern, and giving the occasional wipe down is light work. And being able to use keyboard shortcuts like copy, cut, paste, undo, along with command tab to tab through open apps just like we can on a Mac is where this keyboard really helps a lot. And when considering features like split screen multitasking and just being able to drag and drop content between apps, it all brings the experience a little closer to a laptop. That is up until you're quickly reminded that it's not. Because of the familiarity, I found myself reaching for a trackpad or wireless mouse way more than I really wanted to, and iOS's lack of support for cursor control reduces the experience to just switching between your keyboard, finger, and the pencil, and it all just feels inefficient at times. You know, it's just that I need to be able to navigate iOS a lot faster, just like we can on a desktop class computer, and you just don't get that kind of speed using an iPad, which is why it's still in its very own category of devices. Now, I know I did say it won't be replacing my MacBook Pro for obvious reasons. In some instances it does. So I found myself spending more time on the iPad when it came to just regular web browsing, doing online shopping, pulling up YouTube videos. I can do all of that without having to come to my setup and power on my MacBook Pro or having to detach the MacBook Pro from the setup. I can now use the iPad Pro instead. Now, I will admit though, the iOS Files app is becoming a lot more like Finder for Mac. I just feel that iOS needs to increase their support for more file types, because in the meantime, you might find yourself having to rely on third-party apps from the App Store to open certain file types. I like how the integration of iCloud Drive behaves like Apple's very own Dropbox, and when combined with AirDrop and Apple's continuity features, like the ability to continue a Google Chrome tab that's on my Mac and pick it up in Safari on the iPad in real time, is a seamless experience that's really hard to compete with. Alright, so now, according to benchmarks and all these charts, the iPad Pro can outperform a MacBook Pro, which is, you know, it's a cool stat to show off, but I like to live off practicality instead. And while you can edit videos on the iPad using apps like Luma Fusion and Premeire Rush, they're both cool showcases of its power, but I just feel it's one of those, hey, look what I can do kind of things. I just don't believe that iOS is the right software for the professional world. I mean, I couldn't even get it to read my USB-C SSD, and for whatever that reason is, it's just not a good look for a proclaimed laptop replacement. You won't find me editing videos on an iPad. I believe the iPad needs its own custom software, a flexible software that allows for the connection of peripherals such as wireless mouses or graphic tablets that will take your productivity to the next level. Now, if Apple were to do that and let's say throw in Thunderbolt 3 into their next future iPads, then I'll take the iPad a little more serious. But until then, you're still just looking at an iPad. However, while the iPad Pro isn't Thunderbolt 3 capable, regardless, I find that it works well as a wireless third monitor for my setup. So using Spotify Connect, I can use my iPad as a remote to control the Spotify playback from my MacBook Pro. It's easier, faster, and hey, it frees up monitor space for me to do something else. So the iPad just works great as a desktop sidekick for other small tasks like email or just pulling up a quick YouTube video without interrupting my workspace. I mean, there's so many ideas for this kind of setup. Now, as far as the battery life is concerned, I was actually really impressed. The standby time is great. I usually was able to leave this sitting around the house for about 4 to 5 days before I had to recharge it again, and that was with the Apple Pencil attached. So keep in mind the Apple Pencil will drain the iPad a little bit faster. So if you want to preserve and get the most out of your iPad's battery, just detach the Apple Pencil whenever it's fully charged or you're not really using it like that, and you'll be fine. I would like to know what you guys think about the 2018 iPad Pro, sorry. If you guys are considering picking it up or if you picked it up already, how has it improved your whole workflow and setup? Let me know by dropping those comments down below and showing some love to that like button. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe and turn on the alerts notification so you don't miss out on some more incredible tech videos. As always, I want to thank each and every one of you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out.